All right, hello everybody. So today I'm going to introduce you to Gabriel Marcel. So here are the dates, 1889 to 1973. So I'm going to first talk, so here's the outline. I'm going to first talk about his biography, and then we'll talk a little bit about his thoughts, basically. And there'll be two sections to that. We'll talk about the Disenchanted World, and small b, we'll talk about being and hope. Actually, being, or let's just say the mystery, well, no, being and hope. Let me just leave it like that. Okay, this is the outline for today. All right. So Marcel, so now, from now on, we'll be in France for the next three philosophers. We're going to be pretty much in the same time. We're going to be, Marcel is World War I, Lévinas and Simone Weil are World War II. So we're going to be in that time span, and we're going to be in France. So our travels have ended there. Let me tell you a few things about Marcel as a person, because some of what he has experienced in his life actually influenced his philosophy. So we need to know a little bit about that, and then we'll go into some of his concepts, some of his technical words, and then we'll be done for today. So Marcel was born, like I said, 1889. He was born in complete agnostic parents in France. He was, I say that because his philosophy actually, later in his life, someone would tell him that his philosophy resonates deeply with Christianity, right? But he would be like, why? How is that possible? Because right? So in many ways, Marcel will stumble upon some truths that have already been explored, right? And we'll talk about this. In many world religions, you have elements of what Marcel will have stumbled upon as an agnostic, right? So this is interesting, but let's go back to his life. So when he was 4 years old, his mother died, but something interesting happened to him around that time, is that he always felt her presence, right, continuously throughout his life, even though she had died when he was so young, so he had no real memories of her. He still felt her abiding presence as he was growing up and so forth. And this led him to question, right? And we're going to see some of these questions developed in his philosophical works. This led him to question about the possibility of life after death, right? The fact that he could feel his mother, that it wasn't just a memory, right? This is important because a lot of us would say, well, he was just remembering his mother, right? But he didn't know her. He was so young when she died, but he could feel her presence. This led him to wonder, does this tell me something about the fact that she might still be somehow alive, not alive, but existing, right? But how is that possible, right? That I'm still feeling her presence even though she has departed. So we'll talk about this. The last session on Marcel, the last hour we will go there, where Marcel is exploring philosophically, right, the possibility of life after death. So, and actually this is quite audacious, right? No philosopher since Plato, right? Plato actually did that. He wrote the Apology, where you have, and also the Phaedo, where you have a discourse on life after death. But after Plato, nobody ventured there, right? It wasn't considered philosophical to ask these questions, right? But Marcel actually goes there and really genuinely philosophically explores that possibility and gives an argument. And we're going to talk about that in the last hour. So anyways, he was raised by his father and his aunt in a largely agnostic, typical French context. He ended up studying philosophy, obviously. He was actually a little older than a lot of the very well-known philosophers that came around the time of Sartre, right? If you recall, well, you don't recall, you don't know. But in France at the time, there was a movement called existentialism, right? Some of you certainly have heard of it. That was budding, that was flourishing. And Sartre, right, Jean-Paul Sartre, was the main figure for this movement. So he's considered often to be the father of existentialism, even though he really isn't. He's more the spokesman of existentialism. He developed it, but he certainly wasn't the father, right? Nietzsche, Kierkegaard were the fathers, right? So anyways, so there was this movement. And so Marcel actually came to know Sartre and also Albert Camus, another existentialist. But he's slightly older than them, and he's seen actually responding, mentoring them. And a lot of his essays actually are responses, critical responses to what they are writing at the time, right? So it's interesting. So he was slightly older, and he was kind of, saw himself kind of, or he was kind of a patron of the philosophical souls of Paris at the time. He would organize these Friday evening events where all of the philosophers of the city would come. This was in Paris. And so Sartre would come, Camus would come, and I don't know if he was familiar with Levinas that we're about to study. I don't see any point of contact between the two, but Levinas was also there around that time, right? This was also the time of Levinas. So anyways, he passed, so he finished his degree in philosophy, he started teaching. He was also a drama critic, so he would watch plays and then write a kind of review, right, of those plays. When World War I broke out, he was drafted, but he wasn't drafted as a soldier. He worked for the Red Cross at the time, which was the medical branch of the army. And this is also important now for the rest of his philosophy. He worked, actually, his job under the Red Cross was to go to the families of deceased soldiers, of soldiers who had died on the front, and tell them that their son had died, right? That was his job. He had to go with the flag, and then kind of deliver the news to the families. And now this is significant because he started to notice a pattern in the reactions of the families. He started to notice that each time he would come with the bad news, right, somehow the family still hung on to some hope, to some kind of fragment of hope that maybe perhaps their son had made it, because of course we couldn't always bring the bodies back, right? They were just told that the son died, right? There was no body being brought back from the battle, right? So they always kind of, he noticed a pattern. Almost all of the people he talked to hung on to some hope that somehow things were going to be okay. Somehow maybe he wasn't dead. Maybe there was still a way out. And this really affected him, right? So he actually, in many of his writings, wrote about hope, whether it's a delusion, whether it's real, right? He struggled a lot with the concept, right? The question is whether these families were deluding themselves, right? Nietzsche would be probably saying, of course they're deluding themselves. They're projecting into reality what they want to see. But Marcel sensed something deeper going on than just a delusion, right? So he decided to explore this experience of hope seriously, not dismiss it immediately as a delusion. And he found a number of interesting things about hope that we're going to talk about in the class, right? So main thing you can write down is that Marcel actually takes hope seriously, not as just a way to escape suffering. He sees something deeper going on in hope, and he's attempting to get to that thing in his explorations, right? Okay, so anyways, later after the war, he survives and so forth, obviously, and this is the moment. He was in his 40s, had already written most of his works, and one of his friends comes to him and says, have you ever thought of exploring Catholicism, right? And Marcel is like, no, why? Why would I do that? And he's like, because your writings are resonating deeply with a lot of the concepts, a lot of the ideas that you find in Catholicism. And Marcel was intrigued, and so he went. He started to attend, mass and explore. And indeed, right, he saw powerful connections between what he had stumbled upon as an agnostic and a lot of what Christianity was teaching, right? So you can already feel Nietzsche in the background bristling. By the way, Nietzsche is going to be in class now. He's going to be in class with us, listening in to what Marcel and Levinas and Simone Weil are saying. And I'm always going to bring him in, right? We are now attempting to respond to Nietzsche, to come out of the yeah, to kind of come out of the shock that we have received, right, by reading him. Anyway, so he eventually, actually, Marcel converts to Catholicism eventually, right? He's already middle-aged, 40, and then eventually, right, writes a few more things. But what's interesting is that whatever he had written so far is what we'll be reading, and it was really completely untouched by any type of religious influence, and yet it connects deeply, right, with what Catholicism has been teaching, right, with the teachings of Catholicism. So, but in the class, of course, we'll be dealing with the philosophical writings that he wrote as an agnostic. So we won't be studying his religious writings. Okay, so he wrote a number of things. We'll talk a little bit about the style of his writing at the end of class, but he wrote philosophical journals, so this can give ideas to some of you, right? There's other ways to write philosophy than just a paper with arguments. You can also just write a journal. So he wrote that. He wrote a number of plays. He wrote a number of novels. If you actually want to really understand Marcel, it's best to start with his novels, which are kind of, his novels are kind of carrying a lot of the philosophical ideas that he came across, but in a way that's more accessible, right? Okay. All right, so let's look a little bit about, let's look at his philosophy. Some of the main concepts you're going to stumble upon in the essay that you have to read. So I'm going to start with the Disenchanted World. And did I add? Yes, it's the Disenchanted World. Sorry, there's another part to that title. So the Disenchanted World and Despair. Disenchanted World and Despair. Okay, and then we have Being and Hope. Okay. So what Marcel is going to, his starting point, right, where he begins to philosophize, is going to be the post-Nietzschean world, right, of the death of God. Remember, we read this quote in Nietzsche, right? God is dead, the sea, the open sea lies before us, except that by the time you get to Marcel's time, God is dead and you don't have an ocean, you have a sea of blood, right? This is really, the times have gotten considerably darker, right? With the World War I, World War II. And the death of God now is not looking so joyful anymore, right? You have these battlefields, these scenes of death and bloodshed, and this is really what we are looking at, right? We're not looking at an ocean of boundless possibilities. We're looking at the end of Western civilization, right? So the times have gotten considerably darker, and the death of God in this context is not received as good news, right? We are really in a time where there is nothing, right? And indeed, the death of God has already kicked in. France at the time is atheistic, right? There's no more, most people are not religious. And you have this reality which is completely dire, right? The end of the West, the Western civilization, the death of thousands and thousands of young people, right? And this is the reality. And in this context, right, in this post-Nietzschean world where there's no more, where there's not anything more, right, it becomes impossible to live without a deep feeling of despair, right? So let me say that again so you can write it down, right? We are in the context of post-World War I, between the two wars. The situation is very dark, right? And if this is all there is, right, if there's not something deeper, if there's not a deeper meaning, a deeper reality, it becomes impossible to dwell in that reality without despairing, right? So in the context of Marcel's world, if there is nothing more than what meets the eye, right, you cannot but despair, right? Despair is inevitable in the context of the two world wars if there's nothing deeper, right? And so so Marcel talks about this disenchanted world, right? So let me ask you, what does it mean to enchant? And then we can understand, what does it mean to disenchant? What does it mean to enchant? We have all the Harry Potter fans can respond now. To cast a spell, to charm, Give me more. To enchant is yes, yes. To enchant is to surround with magic, right? And something that is enchanted is something that is magical, right? In other words, there's something going on that is more than what we're used to, right? So the disenchantment of the world is taking the magic out of the world, right? In other words, taking out whatever is, you know, we cannot explain, whatever we cannot control, whatever is not scientific, with the magic, right? We have taken it out. And indeed, when you look at the time of Marcel, there are two things that have taken out the magic of the world, right? The war, which has really disillusioned us as to who we are as human beings, where we're headed, right? Before the wars, we were convinced that we were headed towards progress, right? That was, and in many ways, in the United States, still today, because haven't been through the war, there's still this notion of the American dream that we're headed towards progress. In Europe, it's over. Nobody thinks like that anymore, right? After the two world wars, people realize we are not, as human beings, headed towards anywhere good, right? We are headed towards our own destruction, right? So that's the first magic that has been tossed out. The second one was tossed out with science, right? Science comes in and the scientific worldview comes in, where the only thing that's real is what I can understand. And if I can't understand it, it doesn't exist. This was also the spirit of the times, right? So these two things have disenchanted the world, right? So make sure you write down these two things. The world has been, the magic of the world has been cast out. The element of what Marcel calls mystery, right? Make sure you jot this down, because this is a concept in Marcel, right? The element of mystery, the element of the unknown, the element of the magical, the whatever is not easily grasped by human reason. This has been cast out by two things: the war, which has taken away all our illusions, right, as to there being anything good waiting for us, right? And number two, science, right? The scientific mindset, the hyper-rationalistic mindset, that the only thing that is true and that exists is what I can understand. And if I do not understand it, if it doesn't fit within the framework of my reason, I discard it, right? This was already happening, of course, you've noticed, since the Middle Ages, we were moving towards this disenchantment, right? Remember Maimonides, who didn't believe in miracles, right? And he wanted to be rational. Whatever doesn't fit, right, is he doesn't talk, right? And slowly, right, Nietzsche, right? So we were moving towards this, but now we're there. And what we're seeing is not an endless ocean of possibilities. We are seeing a dead end. That's where we are now, right? And so what Marcel is saying is that this despair is coming from the fact, right? And he's really observing his contemporaries. If you lived in Europe at the time between the two world wars, the predominant emotion was despair, right? People didn't have hope anymore. People didn't believe anymore. People were just cynical, and you can read some of the works, especially of Sartre, right? There's a complete 100% cynical, right? So Marcel is saying, in such a world, we cannot but despair. And the reason we despair, and now this is important, make sure you write this down, is that we have lost a sense of the mystery that permeates all things, right? So make sure you write, this is an important concept, the concept of mystery, right? We have lost the sense of the mystery that permeates all things. In other words, according to Marcel, there is something in our in life, right, which is deeper than what we're just seeing and hearing and witnessing. There is a dimension of depth. Okay, let me write this down, because last time people were misunderstanding what I was saying. Dimension of depth, by which depth, not death. Some people in the exam last semester were writing dimension of death, right? Death, no, depth. Depth means deep, something deep, okay? So what Marcel is sensing is that there is more than meets the eye. There is a dimension of depth, right? There is something more, there's something mysterious at play. And a lot of us, I think, we have at times stumbled on this feeling, right? That there is something more, that this is not all there is, right? There are moments when you're maybe, you know, having an amazing conversation, or in nature, right? Or you're going through a tragic moment in your life, right? This at times, right, it's when you're going through the highest suffering that you start to feel that there is something more, right? So he's talking about that. Tomorrow, when we do Marcel more in detail, we'll talk about how this notion of a dimension of depth is something which you find in many, many worldviews, right? Many, many religious worldviews have talked about this. So I'll bring it up a little bit. But so this dimension of depth, this mystery, he also calls being, right? So when you see being, it means mystery, it means this dimension, right, of depth. So this is how you should understand these concepts when you stumble upon them in his work, right? So for him, the reason we despair is that we have become disconnected from this dimension, right? So, and the key, of course, the way back, the way to feeling, right, any type of relief from the despair and the depression and the anxiety is to find our way back, to reconnect, right? Now, what's interesting, and we'll talk about this, right? How do we reconnect to mystery? How do we reconnect to being in order to overcome this despair, right? Which is inevitable, right? If you don't have that connection to being or to mystery, you will inevitably despair, because in life, things are difficult, things are challenging, things are painful. If you don't have an anchor in that dimension, you are going to be swept away, right, by the challenges that you encounter. So he's talking about that. The only solution to despair is reconnecting to this dimension. Now, because Nietzsche is with us in the class, I'm going to specify something for Nietzsche right now, right? Nietzsche is probably sitting like this, you know, it's like, yeah, right? But what we need to realize is that here, when Marcel is talking about the dimension of mystery or of being, he's not talking about a dimension outside of reality. Remember, that was Nietzsche's worry, right? Nietzsche was sick and tired of us, you know, flying away, flying out of, right, existence, because existence considered worthless, and then inventing, right? Marcel is saying two things to Nietzsche, because remember, Marcel has Nietzsche in mind. Don't think he doesn't know what this guy has said, right? Two things. First of all, this dimension of mystery is found within existence. Make sure you write this down. That's the first point. It's found within existence, meaning that we are not escaping it to find it. It is as we enter existence, as we enter life, as we love, as we suffer, as we study, as we experience certain things, that we are going to draw closer to this dimension. In other words, the more you live, the more you engage with life and with existence, the more you will approach this dimension, because this dimension is found by living. Okay, it's not found by not living, which was what Nietzsche was mad about, right? So make sure you write this down. This dimension of mystery is not found by escaping life. It is found precisely by entering life. The more you live, the more you exist, the more you are grappling with existence, the more you are struggling with relationships, the more, right, you are trying to navigate pain, anxiety, despair, the more you are coming close to this dimension, right? So that's the first point. Second point, and this is where Marcel becomes interesting, this dimension is not a delusion, because we can actually, Marcel actually gives an argument for not the certainty, but the possibility of there being such a dimension, right? So in other words, Marcel is going to argue that this dimension is real. And this is where Nietzsche's ears are popping open, right? Because it's like his idea was that we made it up, right? But Marcel's actually going to give an argument in which he will try to show that there is certainly good reason to believe that this dimension might be real. Of course, he can't prove it 100%, because dimension is mystery. You can't see it, you can't touch it. I can't, take a microscope and be like, here, take a look, there is being, right? So you can't have a scientific demonstration, but he's going to give us evidence as to the possibility that this dimension might exist. So, and then it's up to us to decide, right, whether we want to further explore this or whether we think it's all baloney, right? So that's the idea. So Marcel is really going to work at giving an argument for which will try to show to us that this dimension might well be real, right? And this is where he is really interesting, because nobody has done that so far. Even Plato talks about the realm of the forms, right? As though everybody, right? never gives a single argument, right, for it. Nietzsche, Rumi talk about God like it's normal. Nietzsche, I mean, not Nietzsche, Maimonides, Rumi talk about God like it's normal. Nietzsche is the first one to ask the serious question, like, is this real? Right? And Marcel really is going to attempt to respond and give a philosophical argument as to why this just might be, yeah, we can actually, there is reason to believe that this might be real, right? This dimension of mystery. Okay, now, is everyone good so far? Let me check with you. Raise your hand if you're good. Just checking in on you because I don't see you. So one day I'll open the gallery view and see no one there. That's like my nightmare. it's one of those nightmares teachers have. Okay. All right. So now let's go deeper. Let's zoom in on this dimension of mystery, right? And I'm going to already tell you how I'm already going to give you some elements of this proof that he's going to do. And then, of course, we'll see it in more detail tomorrow. So, okay. So I want you to recall Rumi, right? Who said that there are two realms. There is the realm of what is visible, then the realm of the invisible. And so let me see if you remember which part of us is good at exploring the realm of the visible. According to Rumi.
Mind.
Yes, what?
Mind.
The mind, right? Absolutely, right? So he's saying, right, Rumi is saying, when it comes to the visible realm, it's perfect to use the reason. But when it comes to the invisible realm, what part of us should we be using?
The heart.
The heart. Okay, very good, right? So Rumi is already making this important distinction between the mind and the heart, between two dimensions, and the necessity to shift gears when you're moving from one dimension to the other. The reason a lot of us are not having an experience of the spiritual dimension is that we're applying our reason, right? We want to know, we want to be sure, we want it to make sense. It won't work that way. You have to begin to open the heart, right? And we saw with Rumi a little bit how we can purify the heart so we can begin to have these experiences, right? So Marcel's going to be similar. He's going to say, the only way to apprehend the dimension of mystery is through our feelings. Okay, in other words, there are certain feelings that point to this dimension. Okay, so let me stop a little bit on that. First of all, write this down. Actually, I'll write it in the chat, right? According to Marcel, there are certain feelings that we have that point us in the dimension of mystery. Okay, now, so let me stop a little bit on that because this is very interesting. He's going to go much deeper than Rumi, right? Rumi just says it and then moves on with some metaphor, right? Marcel actually going to do a real analysis. So yes, Trujillo, we're getting there, right? He's going to talk about love. But first of all, I want to talk generally about feeling, right? What we sometimes don't realize, and it's crucial that we shift our view on this if we're going to understand Marcel, is that feelings always tell us something about the world. Okay, make sure you get this down, right? Feelings always tell us something about the world. Now, we are used to thinking about feelings as something internal, that, oh, I feel moody today. I don't know, I feel like shit. I woke up. I don't know why I feel like this. And we don't usually make the connection between how we feel and the external world. But according to Marcel, feelings are always messengers. They're pointing you to something that's going on in the world. So for example, you wake up happy. It's not just that you woke up happy. You're sensing something in the world which is causing this happiness, right? You wake up angry. You're not just an angry person. There is something in the world that has perhaps caused this in the past, right? Because a lot of us are chronically angry, right? So you say, I'm just angry. I'm just an angry person. No, you're not. Something happened, right? Somewhere in your past that triggered this and nourished it, right? So there's something in the world that triggers your anger, or you're depressed and you're thinking, oh, I just have a chemical imbalance. I need to get some meds. Or no, there is your depression is saying something about external reality. By the way, somebody like Kierkegaard, whom we're not studying, but I would suggest to you to read at one point, always maintain that our feelings are very important because they are telling us something about reality. And if we numb the feelings, we will lose what the feelings are trying to tell us. And we're not going to be able to journey and progress and become wiser and become stronger. So a lot of our culture, where each time we have negative feelings, we are immediately put on a dose of something, right, to numb the feelings, it's very dangerous, right? Now, I'm not saying to those who are taking meds, drop the meds. That can be dangerous too. But I'm saying we need to be able, the goal should be eventually to be able to live in tune with our feelings and understand what they're telling us, so that we can begin to make the journey towards a better life, right? You can't, if you don't listen to the messages and the signs, right, that your feelings are giving you, you will not know how to get out of the situation, right? So too often we quickly numb ourselves. That's the reaction. We want to feel good all the time, right? And we don't understand that our feelings are telling us something, right? So anyway, so Marcel believes feelings always tell us something about the world. And so this is what it means so another way to put this is to say that feelings are intentional. Okay, they intend, they point to, they signify towards a reality. Okay, so far so good. Let me check. Let me see your faces. So far so good. Everybody gets the fact that feelings is always saying something about reality. Now, here's the difficult part. Here's the new part. We knew that was fine. Certain feelings point to something deeper. In other words, we will, all of us will experience at some point in our lives certain feelings where we're looking for, in reality, what they would be pointing to, and we don't find. These feelings, says Marcel, are metaphysical feelings. In other words, they're not pointing to the physical realm, they're pointing to the metaphysical realm, right? What does metaphysical mean? What does meta mean? Where's our Greek? Or do we have a Greek in the class? No, not this time. Anybody know what meta means in Greek?
That is like outside of something, right?
Yes, beyond, right? So beyond the physical. That's what metaphysical means, right? Okay, so what Marcel is saying, most of our feelings point to the physical realm, but some of our feelings can only be pointing to the metaphysical realm. And at that moment, these feelings are telling you something. They're telling you that there is something more. And that's the moment of the proof. In other words, we can't have a proof, but we can have glimpses of this deeper reality. We can experience it, right? Let me say that again. Marcel cannot show us under a microscope the dimension of being or mystery, but we can experience moments where we have the intuition of being, where we sense it, where we have a glimpse of it, right, through these feelings. Now, I'm going to give you one example so you'll understand, and tomorrow we'll do the others, right? But this is so this is very important. So although we can't really have a layout, an argument, or a demonstration on the board as to whether mystery or being, whether that dimension exists, we can all experience it at some point in our lives. And most of us don't even know we're experiencing this dimension at times, right? This is why Marcel is really going to lay it out. He's going to lay out the feelings, what they look like, what they feel like, so that we can recognize, at this moment, I'm feeling this dimension. I'm feeling this mystery, right? Enveloping me, right? Around me. Okay, so let's look at one of these feelings, right? Because tomorrow we'll be looking, just telling you in advance, we'll be looking at three feelings. We'll be looking at love, hope, and fidelity, right? These are three feelings that we're going to be exploring, which for Marcel are metaphysical feelings, which are pointing us to this deeper dimension, right? Which are signs, messengers of this deeper dimension. But today we will look at one of them, which is a long one, called ontological exigence. Okay, so it's a big word. So let's first of all parse the word. Now, who is Spanish in the class? You will understand this right away. Who speaks Spanish? Raise your hand. Okay, good, a few of you. In Spanish, we have the word exigencia, right? How would you translate it?
Existence?
Say that again?
Existence?
No. Review your Spanish.
I have to. I don't think I know that word.
Yes, Rodriguez and Trujillo, right? This is an urgent request, urgent demand. You're thinking of existencia. This is exigencia. It's a little different, right? This is your urgent request, okay? I use the Spanish because exigence, ontological exigence is using the French. This is the French exigence, which means the same as the Spanish exigencia, right? Okay, so let's write this down. Exigence is an urgent request or demand, right? Okay, ontological, what does it mean? What does ontos mean, which is the first part of the word?
Some being, right? The philosophy of being.
Very good. Ontos in Greek is being. So this is the urgent demand, longing, need for being. Okay? Ontological exigence is simply the longing for being, or more specifically, the longing for mystery. Okay, so let me write it down. Ontological exigence is simply translated in our language is the powerful longing for mystery or being, for that dimension, right? So in other words, Marcel is saying that there are moments where we feel a powerful longing, and at that moment, what we're really longing for is this dimension, right? And so in a way, at that moment, we are catching a glimpse of this dimension, right? Anytime you long for something, you're already experiencing it partly, right? The longing points you to that dimension, right? When you long for world peace, right? Or justice, right? This longing is pointing you towards that dimension, right? You're not just, right? You are actually, when we long for, this is interesting for now, the days we live in, right? The slogan that is chanted in the demonstrations, no justice, no peace, right? This is one of my favorite slogans. No justice, no peace. When we think of justice, we're not thinking of now. There's nothing like it now. We are sensing a deeper reality, right? Which exists, because how would we know about it? Do you follow what I'm saying? When you say peace, there's no peace. You're not observing, you're sensing. You are aware of a deeper reality, which is real. Otherwise, how would you sense it? Are you following? This is important. If you follow this, you're good, right? Anytime you're thinking of peace or longing for peace or longing for justice, you are actually sensing it. Does everybody follow what I'm saying here? Who does? Put your hand. Okay, so this is important because you're seeing that some of the feelings we have, the longing for peace, the longing for justice, we are not just deluding ourselves. We are aware that there is such a reality. We are, in a way, speaking up for it, right? We are reaching out for it. And the fact that we are sensing what justice is means that it exists. Otherwise, how would we sense it? This is exactly what this is the argument Marcel is making. So actually, let me make sure you guys understand these two concepts. They're not from Marcel, but if you understand this, you will understand Marcel. Anytime we long for peace, right? I'm gonna break it down again, right? So you can write it down. Anytime you long for peace, you are not, that feeling of longing for peace is not coming from anything you've seen in the physical realm, correct? Can you see peace somewhere? Is there peace anywhere in this world? No. So clearly, when you're longing for peace, you're longing for a deeper dimension, right? Which is not a figment of your imagination because you are aware of it. You're sensing it, right? You're not just imagining it. You're connecting to it through this longing. This is what Marcel is talking about. So now let's go back to ontological exigence, which is the longing for mystery. So the best way to understand this is through one of the stories that Marcel tells in one of his novels, right? So in this novel, he's talking about a woman and that she's the equivalent today of some woman living on the Upper East Side in Manhattan, and she has everything, right? She has the right color, she has the right husband, she has the perfect children, right? Children, they have no zits, they're teenagers, but they're perfect. They don't speak back. They have straight A's. Her husband is wealthy. He's loving too. He's not, he's both. She's beautiful. Everything she has, right? And yet he describes in this novel, this woman, she's constantly feeling like something's missing, right? Now, let me check with you. How many of you have had this experience where everything's going fine, but deep down you're sensing something's missing? Anybody have this experience? Okay, so a few of you, right? So this is, at that moment, you might be experiencing this ontological exigence without knowing it, right? So Marcel is saying, since feelings are always pointing to a reality, and when we look at her reality, it's perfect. Therefore, he says, she must be longing for something deeper than just the physical realm, right? Therefore, her feelings are pointing to a deeper dimension, right? And that's where he's saying, possibly, of course, it's never for sure, but it might seem that she is sensing the need to connect to something deeper, which he calls being and mystery, right? Do you follow? That's the essence of the argument, right? If you've understood these words, it's fine. So yes, Cancino, it's a sense of although not yet, because you're longing, right? It's not like Rumi where he's talking about the inner peace, right? This is a longing, this is an agitation. But Marcel is saying, in this agitation, you are already showing an awareness that there is more. That's it. And this awareness that there must be more is the glimpse that there might be something more. You see what I'm saying? So anytime you have this feeling where you're feeling restless, everything is fine, but you're still restless, this is you longing for something more. The longing itself is the proof, right? The longing that there must be something more, this longing that there must be something more is pointing you to the possible dimension that there might be more. Otherwise, how could you have a longing for something that doesn't exist? We always long for something that exists. You can't long for something that doesn't, right? That's the idea. So he's saying that feeling at that moment, because a feeling is always intentional, always caused by an external reality, then necessarily there must be a deeper reality to which this feeling is responding, right? So that's the main argument, right? So let me stop now. Does everybody understand what I said? Are there any questions? This is the most important. If you understand this, you'll be fine with Marcel.
Sorry, I have a question. Is this kind of like the idea when they say like you can't think of a new color? You know what I'm saying? Because that doesn't exist. Every color in the world already exists. So the idea of longing for something shows that we are physically not or like mentally not capable of thinking of something that doesn't necessarily exist. Therefore, the reason that it exists because we can.
Can you please recheck?
Yes, that's the idea. Except be careful, you're not thinking, you're longing, right? Thinking, you might still be able to invent something that doesn't exist, although it would always be a composite of things that exist. Have you noticed how science fiction movies are just really nothing new, right? But this is a longing, right? So this is important because a longing you cannot manufacture, but a delusion you can manufacture. Now I'm thinking of Nietzsche again, right? You can manufacture a delusion, but a longing hits you, right? So yes, you can't long for something. The feeling always points to a reality. If you're longing for something, then that longing has been awakened by something. You can't long without there being an object of your longing, basically, right? So what Marcel is saying is the object is an object that is deeper than what meets the eye. Since there is nothing in the physical realm that this feeling is pointing to, then surely must point to something deeper. Any other questions before I continue? Okay, all right. Good. So Trujillo, about pessimism. Yes, can you clarify your question? Go ahead, speak.
Does Marcel relate this longing with pessimism?
So when you're feeling despair, says Marcel, you're simply connecting to the physical realm, right? You're seeing what is, and naturally you're going to be pessimistic. Well, I could die anyway, at any moment. There's always a catastrophe around the corner. This is never going to go well. You're just looking at reality. But to hope, and we're going to talk about this, you must be connecting to something deeper if you're going to start hoping, because there is nothing in this world that can serve as any foundation for that hope or that love. or we'll see that fidelity or that ontological exigence. So when it comes to the negative emotions, we have plenty in the physical realm to feed these emotions. Basically what Marcel is saying, he's saying any positive emotion we have has no explanation in the physical realm because of the chaos that is reigning there. And so therefore, surely when we're experiencing one of those deep emotions like hope or love, we must be connecting to something deeper. Otherwise, it couldn't arise in us in the world we live in, right? You have a family just been told their son has died and they're hoping, right? And remember, they're not deluding themselves. They're hoping, they have the hope. Hope is there, right? How is that happening? How is this feeling emerging out of the chaos? Well, surely it's emerging because it is because there is a connection in the person to something deeper. Is it clear? Let me make sure. Who's confused? Raise your hand, or a little bit confused. Okay, who's not confused? Okay, so we're good so far. Very good. Okay, so if you understood so far, we should be good when we start to read the text. All right, just a few words on his writing, just so that you can navigate a little bit. So you will feel like this is like a bus hit you in the face with Marcel's writing. It is really hard to follow, and I'll explain why. Here's how Marcel writes, right? It's very frustrating. So you start reading, and it's very clear, and like he's going in a direction, you're sensing that he's, getting somewhere where you'll finally understand everything about the universe, right? So you're there, you're about to get it, and poof, he changes and goes into another direction. Let's talk about this now. And so then you get into it, and you're like, oh, yeah. Okay, what's next? And then again, he switches. So he's constantly meandering through his thoughts, leaving us hanging. And there's a reason for this, right? The reason he leaves us hanging is for us to continue if we want to, right? So Marcel just gives us a glimpse of the possibilities. And then it's up to us to go deeper, right? All he's doing, he's like a tourist guide, right? Here's the cathedral, here's the lake, here's the hotel. It's up to you now. If you want to visit the cathedral, you have to go in. If you want to visit the lake, you have to get on the boat. He's just there pointing out. These are the possibilities as a human being. You could go deeper. You could go in this direction. You could journey in that direction. All he's doing is giving us the beginning of the road. But the rest, we have to think. We have to meditate. We have to contemplate. We have to experience, right? So it's very hard on the one hand to understand Marcel because he's going like this, because he's just a tourist guy pointing us to the sights, right? The other reason is because he's writing with the whole Western philosophical tradition on his back. So if you're not familiar with the whole tradition, you're going to lose yourself a bit, right? This is 20th century writing. It's difficult, right? Levinas is worse. Simone Weil, I chose her at the end because she's very easy to read, right? But both Marcel and Levinas, they are writing in times that are chaotic, difficult, challenging, and their writing reflects the reality. It's the writing of a mind which is suffering, agonizing to find meaning in the chaos. That's the sense I get when I read them. These are intellects that are agonizing to squeeze meaning out of the chaos. And that's why when you read them, it's laborious, it's chaotic, it's agonizing, right? So that's the reason. Remember when they're writing, both Levinas and Marcel are writing during the world wars. You can't have an easy, transparent, clear cut, here's the rules. This is the time of Job, right? Everything is shattered. All the meanings, all the hopes of the Western civilization have been shattered by the two wars. And now here are some people trying to come out of the ashes, trying to get a few sparks of meaning together. It's not going to look good, right? You can't come out of the war and be like, here is the meaning of life with a cup of wine. No, right? It's not going to happen. So these two giants, right? They're intellectual giants. They cannot, like Maimonides, give us a guide to the perplexed, right? Because they are themselves perplexed, right? Maimonides was he was good. He was anchored. He had a good job, no war. He could write a guide to the perplexed, right? But people like Marcel and Levinas, who have come out of the war, themselves fragmented, is difficult. All they can do is gather from the ashes a few sparks of meaning and throw them together and hope for the best. This is how they're writing, right? So understand the existential background behind the tortured writing, right? Before you judge and be like, he's not clear. Why isn't he clear? He's not clear because nothing is clear, right? It's chaos, it's war, right? There's no clarity, right? That's why he's not clear. So tell yourself that you're entering the mind of someone who has how do you call it? Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. This is writing of someone who has PTSD, okay? This is the mind of someone who's been through the war and still trying to make sense of reality. And because powerful intellect is able to bring something to the table, but it's fragmented, it's convoluted, it's laborious, because it's reflecting, right, the spirit of the time. So again, no one is allowed to judge the writings of Marcel and Levinas because of this. Until you've been through a war, you can't judge why they write like this. Okay, I'm good. I've done my introduction. Tomorrow we'll go into the actual text. I'm gonna leave some time now for the Martin Luther King. So let me turn off the recording.